The first official report read like a script. Routine traffic stop, no incident, no misconduct. It was filed quietly, quickly, as if the weight of what happened could be buried beneath paperwork and a few polite lies. But Cedar View wasn't quiet anymore. By Tuesday, a reporter from the Daily Sentinel left a voicemail at the station. By Wednesday, a local podcast aired a segment titled, "Chief Pulled Over by Her Own Men." By Thursday morning, it had spread beyond county lines. The mayor called before sunrise. "Kendra," he said, voice tight with urgency, "this is blowing up. I need to know, do we have a problem?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, and we've had one for a long time. It's just that now, you can't look away." There was a pause, not silence, just a delay long enough to suggest discomfort. She let him sit in it. By noon, Internal Affairs was parked outside the precinct in an unmarked SUV. By 2, every officer in the department received an official notice. All stops, all body cam footage, all patrol logs from the last 60 days were under review. Behind closed doors, the whispers turned to grumbles. Some blamed the press, others blamed her. A few tried to blame the stop on poor communication or misinterpretation, but the badge didn't misinterpret. It recognized its reflection. By Friday, Officer Camden, the younger one from the roadside, submitted a request for personal leave. By the following Monday, it became a resignation. No farewell, no badge-turning ceremony, just an empty locker and silence. The senior officer followed 2 days later. Early retirement, he called it. But everyone knew. Kendra didn't gloat. She didn't speak to the press. She let the facts speak louder than any headline. At the next department meeting, she didn't mention the resignations. She didn't need to. Instead, she addressed the entire room with the same calm steel that had become her signature. "Transparency isn't an attack," she said. "It's the bare minimum." Some nodded. Some stared straight ahead. But no one scoffed this time. No one dared. Outside, cameras waited near the front steps, hoping for a quote, a soundbite, a crack in her armor. But all they got was the same woman who had driven into town alone, calm, composed and unshakable. She walked past them with her head high, not out of pride, but out of purpose. Because this wasn't just a fallout, it was a reckoning. And Cedar View was learning that justice doesn't knock first. Sometimes it drives itself in. Badge ready, seatbelt fastened, and silence sharp enough to leave a mark. The sky was overcast, soft with the weight of early spring. Clouds drifted slow and full above Cedar View as Kendra walked the familiar stretch of road, the same shoulder where her tires had once crunched under pressure, the same spot where silence had carried more threat than noise. But this time, she wasn't alone. A group of officers trailed behind her. Not in a formation, not by command, but by choice. Some wore patrol blues, others, plain clothes. Among them, a few of the old guard, eyes cautious but open, and a few new recruits, walking lighter than their boots allowed. Beside them, community members strolled in quiet clusters, teachers, small business owners, pastors, teens with earbuds in. Children skipped near the edge, waving small paper flags printed with the Cedar View emblem. Someone had handed Kendra one too. She held it gently but didn't wave it. She didn't need to. The walk had no speeches, no flyers, no television crews. Just footsteps over pavement, echoing with purpose. As they neared the curve where she'd been pulled over weeks ago, Kendra slowed. A few officers glanced her way, unsure whether to stop or keep moving. She didn't pause long, just enough to acknowledge the memory that hung in the air like a checkpoint, never fully cleared. She kept walking. A young girl on a porch called out, "Hi, Chief Hayes." Kendra smiled. "Hey there." The girl grinned, waving harder, like she'd just seen a superhero. Further up the block, Pastor Neil gave a respectful nod. A teacher from Eastbrook Elementary joined the walk mid-route, offering her a quiet thank you with no context needed. The work wasn't finished, not even close. Complaints still came in. Bias didn't vanish with policy change. And not every officer had bought in. But something had shifted, not just in procedures, but in posture. People had started looking each other in the eye again, listening a beat longer, asking different questions. Kendra didn't mistake visibility for victory. She knew better. knew how quickly systems could snap back into comfort. But she also knew how to stay rooted. As the walk wound back toward the station, a few officers peeled off to chat with residents. A teenager asked if he could apply for the department's new youth advisory board. 2 business owners shook her hand. One whispered, "We've been waiting for someone like you." Kendra didn't reply, just nodded once. Back at the station steps, she looked out at the street, this quiet strip of asphalt that had once tried to shrink her. It hadn't. She had outwalked it. And though justice didn't arrive all at once, it had started here, in a badge reclaimed, on a road remembered, with a woman who knew how to move forward without leaving the truth behind. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone who's lived through a similar moment, don't let it end here. Share this video. Start the conversation. Comment below with your thoughts or your own experiences, because real change doesn't just come from policies, it comes from people who refuse to look away. They thought she was just another black woman driving through the wrong part of town. 2 officers. 1 traffic stop. A routine flex of power. But when they demanded her license, questioned her presence, and hinted she didn't belong, they didn't realize who they had just pulled over. Not a suspect. Not a civilian. But the new chief of police. And by the time the truth came out, their careers and the department would never be the same. On a long day. The morning air was thin, still holding on to the last breath of night. Dew clung to the edges of grass, lining the 2-lane road, as soft orange light broke over the hills. Kendra Hayes drove with both hands on the wheel, her posture upright, her face unreadable. A navy blazer hung neatly over a crisp white blouse, her badge tucked in the glove compartment, out of sight, but never far from reach. The sign on the roadside read, "Welcome to Cedar View, a town built on tradition." Kendra glanced at it briefly. She didn't need a welcome. She had read the reports, the town's past, the complaints never formally filed, but whispered between lines of testimony. She had seen the body cam footage that mysteriously lost audio halfway through. She wasn't stepping into a role. She was stepping into a fire. Her phone buzzed once in the passenger seat. A text from the mayor. "Good luck today. You've earned this." She didn't reply. Kendra had spent the last 20 years earning things people said she didn't deserve. She earned her stripes in precincts where she had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously.
She'd navigated politics, patrols, and public scorn without ever raising her voice.
Her record spoke louder than anger ever could. The town came into view slowly. Brick storefronts, shuttered diners, American flags fading in the sun. A few early risers were out, walking dogs or picking up coffee from the only open cafe. She noticed how they looked at her car. Not long, just enough. Her grip tightened on the wheel. The cruiser she passed at the edge of town didn't move, but she felt its gaze. This wasn't going to be a first-day handshake and donuts kind of welcome. She pulled onto Maple Street, headed toward the station. One right turn, and she'd be there. A place with her name already etched on the office door, but not yet in their respect. A red light blinked yellow up ahead. Empty street. No cross-traffic. She stopped anyway, because in Cedar View, the rules weren't just laws, they were expectations. Expectations that certain people would speak softer, stand smaller, move out of the way. But Kendra didn't shrink. Not then. Not ever. As the light turned green, she pressed gently on the gas and moved forward, into a town that didn't know her yet. Into a role that would demand all her grace and all her fire. Into a day that, unknown to her, would begin not with a salute, but with a stop. The morning had just begun to settle. A quiet kind of stillness hung over the road. No traffic, no rush, just the hum of tires on pavement, and the low rhythm of the radio, barely audible in Kendra's car. She was less than 10 minutes from the station, her thoughts already shifting to the agenda ahead. Policy reviews, department audit prep, her first all-staff briefing. A full day, one she had planned to the minute. Then came the flash. Blue, red, a sharp burst of color in her rearview mirror. Unmistakable, unwelcome. She blinked once, checked her speed, her signals. Nothing out of place, nothing illegal. Still the lights danced behind her like a warning shot. The siren chirped once, then again, longer this time. She eased the car to the shoulder. Old instincts clicked into place. Engine off, window down, hands on the wheel. This wasn't fear, it was muscle memory, the kind taught to some by parents, to others by lived experience. Stay calm, stay still, don't escalate. A cruiser door slammed, then another. 2 officers approached, shadows cutting across her driver's side mirror. White, mid-40s, square jaw, stern mouth. The first one walked with the calm confidence of someone used to getting the last word. The second was younger, eyes scanning everything, her license plate, the back seat, her face, with suspicion he didn't bother to hide. No one said why she was stopped. The older officer leaned down, license and registration, flat, empty, not even a good morning. Kendra reached slowly into the glove compartment. Her documents were already clipped together. Habit. She handed them over without a word. She felt the familiar ache in her chest, not panic, not anger, just a heaviness, like a memory knocking too early. The younger officer stepped closer. "Were you headed this early?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "This neighborhood can be unpredictable." She looked at him, once, calm, direct. "I'm on my way to work." He tilted his head, like that answer wasn't quite good enough. "And what kind of work is that?" The older officer said nothing, still flipping through her registration. The younger one smirked, hand resting near his holster, not threatening, just close enough to remind her of who he thought was in charge. For a moment, Kendra said nothing, let the question hang. She could have ended it there, dropped the title, flashed the badge, reversed the balance. But not yet, because this right here was the problem, and she needed to feel it again. So when she answered, it was with a calm so measured it cut. "You'll find out soon enough." And with that she looked forward again, past them, past the cruiser, toward the department, toward the reckoning they never saw coming. The older officer held her license like it weighed more than it should. His eyes moved over it slowly, as if double-checking for something that didn't belong. The younger one lingered closer, restless, as if silence made him itch. "So, Kendra Hayes," he said, drawing out her name like he was trying it on. "You from around here?" She didn't answer right away. She had learned the power of stillness, learned how quiet could speak louder than any retort, especially with men like this, who looked for reaction more than reason. "I just moved to town," she replied evenly. He nodded, exaggerated. "Ah, well, welcome. Cedar View's a little different than most places. Tight-knit, traditional." He smiled like it was a warning dressed as a welcome. She let the words pass, like smoke. The older officer cleared his throat, stepping slightly closer. "What brings you out this way?" "It's early for a drive. I told your partner. I'm on my way to work." "Right." The younger one jumped in. "Just making sure. Gotta be careful out here. This stretch of roads had incidents." His tone carried something extra, not quite a threat, not quite concern, just enough suggestion to imply she didn't belong. Kendra looked at him then. "Not long, just enough. You stopping every car headed to work this morning?" she asked, voice soft, untouched by emotion. He blinked, looked away for a second too long. The older officer shifted, uncomfortable. "Just doing a routine check. You understand." But she didn't nod, didn't make it easier for them. She simply kept her hands on the wheel, gaze steady. That kind of quiet, unnerved people, especially people used to control. The younger one tried again. "You got family here? Friends? I mean if you're new." Kendra didn't answer. Not this time. Let him fill the space with his own assumptions. That was always the most revealing part. "All right," the older officer muttered finally, handing back her license. "Just stay safe." She took the card without looking at him, slipped it back into her wallet, shifted the car into park, but didn't move an inch. There was a pause, one of those awkward dangling moments, when the person who thought they were in charge starts to realize they're not, but still doesn't know why. "You have a good day now," the younger one said, forced cheer cracking through. Kendra offered a faint smile, the kind that held no warmth. "Just precision. I intend to." And with that the silence pressed heavier than anything they had said, because something in her stillness told them this wasn't over. And deep down, they both knew, they hadn't just pulled over a woman on her way to work, they had pulled over the storm. The older officer took a step back, glanced toward the cruiser, then back at her. Something unspoken passed between him and the younger one. One of those silent exchanges that always seem to precede bad decisions. "We're gonna need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he said, voice firm now. Not a request, a test. Kendra didn't move. She looked straight ahead, blinked once, then turned her gaze slowly toward him. "Is there a legal reason for that?" she asked, calmly. The younger officer spoke before the senior could answer. "You're acting a little evasive. That can raise flags. If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind stepping out." There it was. The shift. Kendra kept her hands on the wheel, her jaw clenched so slightly, it was barely visible, but the air inside the car changed. He couldn't see it, but he felt it. The space between authority and arrogance had collapsed, and they were standing knee-deep in it. "I've answered your questions. I've cooperated. There's no probable cause here," she said evenly. "So unless you have a legitimate reason, I won't be stepping out of this vehicle." The younger one smirked, trying to puff himself up. "That attitude won't help you. We can escalate if we need to." "Escalate," she repeated, slowly, her voice like stone wrapped in silk. "For what?" "Driving to work." He took a step closer, posture stiff. "You're being difficult." "No," Kendra said, eyes narrowing. "I'm being lawful. There's a difference." The senior officer raised a hand toward his partner, signaling him to pull back. But the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and in the space where professionalism should have been, all that remained was assumption and ego. Kendra took a breath, deep and measured. She had walked through courthouses, where she was mistaken for a clerk, sat at tables where men explained her own policies back to her. She had been underestimated her entire life, and she had learned to let it slide, to wait, to choose the moment that mattered. This was that moment. She reached over to the passenger seat, lifted a small black case, opened it slowly. Inside, her badge, gleaming, official, final. She held it up, not like a weapon, like a mirror. "I'm Chief Kendra Hayes," she said, her tone cutting through the quiet like a siren. "You're detaining your superior officer, without cause." On her first day, the silence that followed was deafening. The younger officer's jaw twitched. The senior one paled. No one moved. No one spoke. Because the line had been crossed, and the woman they thought they could corner was the one now drawing new ones. The silence stretched. Long enough for the birds overhead to fill it. Long enough for the wind to rustle the grass beside the road, like applause no one dared give. The badge in her hand gleamed in the morning light, its weight undeniable. The younger officer's mouth opened, then shut. Whatever bravado he had walked up with was gone now, swept clean by 6 simple words that refused to be ignored. "I'm Chief Kendra Hayes." Not a threat, not a boast, just a fact, a quiet detonation that turned the ground beneath their feet into something unstable. The older officer stepped back, almost reflexively. He looked at the badge, then her face, then the badge again, as if hoping they didn't match, as if hoping this was some elaborate test, and not the truth he was choking on. You're the chief?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Kendra said, still seated, still composed. "Appointed last month, sworn in 3 days ago." The younger officer looked away, jaw tightening like he was trying to bite back regret, or fear. Maybe both. Kendra slowly placed the badge on her lap. She didn't gloat, she didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at them the way only someone with nothing left to prove could. "Would you like to explain," she continued, "why I was pulled over? What part of driving the speed limit on an empty road qualifies as suspicious?" Neither officer answered. The senior one shifted his weight. "We may have misread the situation." "No," Kendra corrected, eyes sharp. "You didn't misread. You assumed. And you acted on that assumption with authority you had no right to use." The younger officer's face burned red. He looked like he wanted to disappear. "I see now why so many in this town don't trust the badge," she added. "It's not the uniform. It's the people inside it." The words didn't need to be loud. The truth did the shouting for her. The older officer finally straightened up, clearing his throat. "Chief Hayes, we apologize. This was an error." Kendra raised an eyebrow. "An error?" He nodded, slowly. "Yes, ma'am." She exhaled once. Not relief, just release. "This isn't about me being the chief," she said quietly. "This is about how you treat people when you think they're powerless." They both stood frozen. the siren lights still flickering weakly behind them, a show of power now reduced to static, and for the first time in that morning, it was clear, the badge didn't belong to them anymore. It never really had. Kendra opened the door with slow precision, not rushed, not reactive. The crunch of her heel against the gravel was the only sound as she stepped out, shoulders squared, the early light catching the edge of her badge like truth made visible. She didn't move fast. She didn't need to. The officers watched her like something sacred was walking toward them, and they weren't sure whether to salute or retreat. She stopped, just outside the open door, stood tall, let the silence do most of the talking. "I've spent 20 years in this uniform," she said quietly, her voice low but steady, "and in that time I've been ignored, second-guessed, and stopped more times than I can count. But never, not once, have I let it change what the badge means to me." The younger officer looked down. The senior one kept his eyes on her, but something in them had softened, not out of respect, out of realization. "You didn't just question my presence," Kendra continued. "You questioned my right to move freely in the very city I've been appointed to protect. Not because of any real threat, but because I didn't match the picture in your mind." The wind picked up gently. Her blazer shifted. The badge stayed still. "This moment, it's not going away. Not for you, not for me, and not for the department," she said. "You'll be reporting directly to me for the next 6 weeks. Every stop you make, every interaction, I want it documented, reviewed, scrutinized." The older officer opened his mouth to speak, but she lifted a hand, not to silence him, just to finish what she came to say. "If that makes you uncomfortable, good. Maybe now you'll understand what discomfort feels like when it's undeserved." Her words didn't rise. They didn't need to. They carried the weight of every time she'd bitten her tongue, every time she'd chosen dignity over rage. She took a step closer, not menacing, measured. "Respect," she said, her voice lowering, "is not a courtesy you give. It's a standard you uphold. If you can't do that, you shouldn't wear that badge." The senior officer nodded slowly. The younger one still hadn't moved. Kendra didn't wait for apologies. She'd heard too many. That meant nothing. Instead she turned, calm, controlled, stepped back into her car, and closed the door. The engine started. The lights behind her dimmed, and as she pulled onto the road, leaving 2 humbled officers in her wake, one truth rang louder than any siren. She hadn't just taken back the moment. She'd redefined who held the power in it. The station sat like a fortress of routine, brick walls, narrow windows, and a parking lot filled with squad cars angled just so. Familiar. Predictable. Until today, Kendra pulled into the reserved space marked Chief of Police. No fanfare. No one waiting to greet her. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights inside, and a handful of glances through tinted glass, as word of her arrival began to ripple. She entered without hesitation, her footsteps sharp on the linoleum. Officers looked up. Some nodded. Others stared too long before quickly returning to their keyboards or coffee. She didn't slow down. Inside her new office, the blinds were already drawn, desk cleared, nameplate freshly placed. Chief Kendra Hayes. She didn't sit. Not yet. There was one task she needed to finish before anything else. 10 minutes later, the 2 officers from the roadside incident stood across from her, hats in hand, backs stiff, eyes darting anywhere but at hers. She remained behind the desk, calm, upright, letting the silence settle just enough to become uncomfortable. "I've asked you both here because what happened this morning wasn't just inappropriate," she began. "It was indicative of a deeper issue within this department." The senior officer opened his mouth. She raised a hand. "This isn't a conversation," she continued. "It's a directive." She walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from them. No podium, no rank to hide behind, just presence. "Starting today for the next 6 weeks, every traffic stop you conduct will be logged, reviewed, and cross-referenced with community feedback," she said. "You will report directly to me, personally." Their bodies stiffened. The younger officer swallowed hard. The senior one's jaw worked like he wanted to challenge it, but didn't have the standing anymore. "I don't care how long you've been here," she said. "Your habits don't make them right. Your badge doesn't shield you from accountability. That time is over." She let the words sink in, not shouted, not rushed, just honest. "I'm not here to punish. I'm here to rebuild, but I won't do it with silence or with shadows. The younger officer finally spoke, his voice low. Yes, ma'am. Kendra nodded once. You're dismissed. And remember, this department doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people we serve. They left without a word, the door closing softly behind them. She stood for a moment, staring out the small window in her office. The town stretched quietly beyond the glass, sunlight grazing rooftops, sidewalks being swept, a new day pretending it was just like the one before. But it wasn't, because starting now, the shield they used to hide behind was looking right back at them. The room was too quiet for a Monday. Rows of uniforms filled the chairs, some fresh pressed, some worn soft from years on the job. A few officers leaned back, arms crossed. Others sat up straight, alert but unreadable. The bulletin board behind them still held last week's shift rotations, and a faded flyer for the precinct picnic. Nothing had been moved, but everything had changed. Kendra stood at the front, no podium between her and them, her badge clipped cleanly over her heart, her voice steady. This morning I was pulled over by two of our own. A ripple, a few eyes widened, one cough, one foot tapped faster. I wasn't speeding, I wasn't swerving, I wasn't violating any traffic law. She paused. I was driving while being new, while being unfamiliar, while being black. No one spoke, but the silence wasn't the same as respect. It was tension, held breath, uncertainty now colliding with consequence. The officers who stopped me assumed I didn't belong. They made vague threats, pressed with unnecessary questions. They only stopped when I told them who I was. She scanned the room, took in every uniform, every pinned smile, every averted glance. This is not about bruised egos or embarrassment. This is about culture. A culture that lets certain officers believe they can act on instinct over evidence, assumption over law. No one shifted now. I am not here to embarrass anyone, she said. But I will not let silence protect broken patterns. What happened this morning isn't isolated. It's reflected in complaint reports, in community whispers, in the way people tense up when they see us coming. She stepped forward, just enough to make them feel it. From this day forward, Cedar View policing will look different. Every officer will undergo training. Every stop will be logged, reviewed. Accountability is not a punishment. It's a promise. A hand went up near the back. Sergeant Langley, 20 years on the force. Respected. Resentful. Chief, with all due respect. If this was just a misunderstanding, Kendra cut in. Not with volume, with finality. It wasn't. And even if it were, we don't get to call harm a misunderstanding just because we walk away from it unscathed. The room stilled again. You swore an oath. Not just to enforce the law, but to represent it. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand. But understand this too. Uncomfortable isn't the same as unsafe. And discomfort is not a reason to look away. She let the silence settle once more before speaking the last words. The rules haven't changed. The expectations have. And with that she turned and walked out. No applause, no pushback. Just the weight of her words filling the space she left behind. And for the first time in a long time, that room full of eyes didn't look through her. They saw her, and they knew their days of unchecked power were numbered. The room didn't erupt. It cracked, quietly. A scoff from the second row. A muttered unbelievable near the back. Someone exhaled too loudly, trying to hide a laugh behind a cough. The resistance didn't come in raised voices or slammed fists. It came in the small betrayals, eye rolls, crossed arms and glances traded like currency. Kendra stood just outside the doorway, watching through the glass as officers filtered out of the briefing room. She caught every expression. The ones who looked down, the ones who looked too long, the ones who didn't look at all. She already knew their names. Lieutenant Porter passed without a word, jaw clenched tight. He had built his career on control, the kind that wore a smile in public and sharpened behind closed doors. His silence wasn't respect. It was disapproval wrapped in discipline. Detective Arroyo gave a slow nod, subtle but deliberate. One of the few who had pulled her aside during the hiring process, said he hoped her arrival would shake the roots a little. Now he stood taller. Sergeant Langley brushed past with a quick shake of his head. No greeting, no eye contact. He had spoken his piece. She had shut it down. The power struggle had begun. Then there was Officer Singh, young, quiet, always watching. He gave her a small nod. Didn't linger. But it was enough. A signal. One of the fence-sitters maybe, waiting to see where the wind blew. And it would blow. Inside her office, Kendra laid the department roster across the desk. Names, ranks, disciplinary records, complaint histories, commendations. She didn't need gossip. She had data, patterns, behavior, everything she needed to separate the ones who would walk with her from the ones who would drag their feet, or worse, dig in their heels. She marked the names with small colored tabs, blue for solid, yellow for unknown, red for resistance. There were more reds than she hoped, fewer blues than she needed, but that was the job. She didn't come to Cedar View, expecting to be liked. She came to lead. Later that afternoon, she caught sight of the two officers from the traffic stop walking out of the locker room. Their movements were clipped, guarded. They looked up when they saw her, hesitated. She said nothing, just looked. Not with challenge, not with forgiveness, with awareness. And that was enough, because in a department long ruled by unspoken rules and silent alliances, Kendra had spoken, and some had heard it as a threat, but others had finally heard it as a promise. It started as a whisper behind deli counters, across barbershop chairs, between sips of morning coffee. Did you hear what happened to the new chief? They pulled her over, didn't even know who she was. She didn't lose her cool, just showed them the badge. By midday, the story had legs. By sunset, it had roots. At McAllister's Hardware, two older men stood by the cash register, voices low. One shook his head. This is what happens when you let politics pick a chief. Across the street, Mrs. Felton clutched her purse tighter as she stepped into the bakery. Just what this town doesn't need, more tension. But just a block down, at a small soul food kitchen with flickering neon lights, a woman named Diane wiped her hands on her apron and smiled at her niece. Finally, she said, someone who knows what it feels like to be pulled over for nothing. At the middle school, a custodian named Ray paused by the vending machine, telling a teacher in hushed tones, same thing happened to my son last year. No apology, no reason. Maybe now things'll change. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The people who had felt invisible didn't need a parade. They needed proof. And this moment where someone in power had been treated like they weren't, was the closest thing to justice they'd seen in years. Inside a modest salon near 5th and Broad, the story took on new shape. A woman in curlers whispered. She didn't yell, didn't curse, just stood there with her badge, and let him choke on their own mistake. The room buzzed with a quiet kind of pride. Meanwhile, in homes where the curtains stayed drawn and the news stayed off, some shook their heads and muttered about how things were changing too fast. They blamed the chief without knowing her name, blamed the moment without knowing the history. But the town was shifting, not all at once, not cleanly, but undeniably. At a small church just outside the city line, Pastor Neil rewrote his Sunday sermon after hearing the news. Cedar View has always asked the question, who belongs? He said to a quiet congregation. Maybe it's time we start answering it differently. In the silence between those who feared change and those who had prayed for it, something began to grow. Not defiance, not celebration, hope. The kind that sits quietly in the corners of a room. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind that arrives with the weight of truth, and a woman behind the wheel, who never flinched.